All right, so first up we have UX maintainership. This was something that was brought up, I forget by who. Yeah. That basically there's concerns around the health of the UX team. There's basically only one maintainer. Thank you to them. And we have issues advancing new features, getting PRs merged, generally just getting anything done in that area. And I guess they're looking for some actions to ensure the health of the UX team.
I think the action they're looking for is naming a few maintainers. Is that right?
Yeah.
I believe so, but it's kind of tricky because the easy part's naming them as a maintainer. The hard part is getting them to do the maintainer work. If there were or are people doing maintainer work, then I don't think anyone would have issues naming them as maintainers. So it could be that we need to go incentivize and encourage people to contribute here, or maybe we need a reshaping of things. The UX group is kind of a odd group out in some ways, given that they're not really doing UX work anymore. It's more like they used to cuddle working group, which maybe if we just renamed it, that doesn't solve anything, so it's not relevant. But it's always felt like a little bit distinct to me. Like in the past, it was really the Ed working group where he was leading it and doing a bunch of stuff for all sorts of areas. But once he left, it's kind of died off to some extent, I think. So,
do we have any docs for what's expected of maintainers?
I believe we do in the community repo. We have a list of roles and what's expected. The TLDR is reviewing PRs, issues, triage, reviewing design docs, that sort of thing. It's not like the world's highest bar as a role, but it is, kind of an owner of an area of Istio. So.
So I guess one thought is promote some of these active users, but unfortunately the number from KB is not very looking good, right? So Xiaohong has 120 PRs, and the next person only have 11 PR, which is way below. The other idea, I guess, would be maybe we have an existing maintainer group can take over UX, maybe the networking or maybe some other group, whichever we determine is appropriate, and can be able to do reviews and approvals for the UX work group. So that would effectively solve the maintainer problems, assuming we already trust those maintainers, and we would trust them to review for the UX. I'm thinking a lot of the Istio cuddle stuff are related to networking changes we have in Istio, and make sure we provide better usability experience to our user.
So I'm looking at dev stats for the open PR age, and we're looking. I mean, I won't say we're looking amazing, but we're looking consistent over the past 3 years, in terms of the median age of open PRs, which tends to sit around 7, and then it says 7 hours. I think that's 7 days. I think that data is mislabeled there. And then the average number of open PRs at any given time being an average of like 27. Both of those seem pretty constant for the last 3 years. I can't filter it down to user experience. Unfortunately, there's no like label selector here, and that would be interesting, but.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, the stats are probably hard to analyze because big difference between a massive PR that legitimately takes forever and tiny PR that takes forever, but it shouldn't, and tiny PR that doesn't take forever and it's merged instantly. So it's kind of a bit warped.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that'd be interesting too is like why. I think it is true that in areas like East Jakarta, we have seen not a lot of contributions, which is interesting because East Jakarta has probably by far the lowest barrier to entry. I wonder if part of it is not having, like we're talking about adding maintainers, which is kind of like the bottom of the leadership tier in the working group. I wonder if it's a lack of the kind of top end of like leading a clear roadmap and splitting out items for people to easily onboard, and that we actually should be addressing this from that angle. Because I would imagine if we had like, you know, all sorts of detailed issues that are easy for people to pick up, there's pretty often people that are looking to get involved, and Easter Cuddle is like such an obvious area to start to do that, but we just don't have any roadmap at all for Easter Cuddle, so we end up with, you know, we have all these experimental commands that are lingering. It's just like no one's really taking broad ownership of the area. A lot of people that generally would take ownership of areas like that and, you know, lead roadmaps and whatnot are kind of focusing on other areas like ambient and whatnot.
I mean, I think that's a good idea. The one thing I'm curious about with that would be trying to help with the newer people with onboarding those, right? Because obviously it sounds like, you know, we should come up with some, you know, sort of the good, you know, first issues or things like that in this list. So then how do we make sure that there's people to help onboard them? Because if the work group itself is lacking time, then it might be hard to help these people trying to start out, unless we have a better way to do that.
Do we have any evidence that people are actually having a hard time starting up? Right? Like that might not be the issue at all.
That could be true.
I think DevStats does have a dashboard related to that. Something about new contributors over time or something along those lines. It would require more digging than I can probably do in real time for all of us this morning, but I can dig that up.
Yeah, I mean, there's evidence that PRs for net new-ish contributors to Istio Cuddle look like they're having trouble getting their PRs in. Because if they're not, then it's just an indication that nobody is motivated to go and add Istio Cuddle, which may be evidence that A, it's good enough for their use in the current state, or there's a lack of top-line roadmap and a kind of collective driving of the community on it. I genuinely suspect it's that in combination with ambient sucking the developer energy room is almost certainly what's going on. Not that people are having difficulty writing PRs or getting them approved.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I'm going slightly off topic with this, but one thing I've been thinking a bit about recently is about all this talk of Istio's complexity and what that means for the project, especially as we talk about adoption from other products for various reasons. But one thing I feel like we've missed out on a bit with all the work on ambient and other areas is like polishing what we have. So there's a huge amount of polish that could be added to Istio, and Istio Cuddle is one big part of that, right? So I don't know where I'm going with this actually. But maybe that's something we want to address and start directing people towards. And that's not something that anyone that's new can come and say like, oh, like this feature needs some polish probably, unless it's very obvious because they don't know it. It's actually kind of like something that people here or other experienced maintainers know the friction from, you know, talking to 100 different people and know where to go from there. So I do wonder if we should start as a project investing more in that area as well, but it's also hard because I really want to ship ambient beta as soon as possible. I don't want to take away from that. But maybe once that lands, then we start shooting gears a little bit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just natural refractory periods, right? Like we spent a lot of time on polish, right, 2 years ago, right, and have spent a lot of time on ambient for the last 18 months. And I suspect when ambient settles down infrastructurally, we'll ramp up and polish again.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely Istio Cuddle work to support ambient that's been happening, as well as Istio Cuddle work that I was supposed to be doing that I've got about 50% done and not touched in a few weeks to support some of the deprecation work we want to do and things like that for operator.
So coming back to the original question, is the right action here winding out a working group?
So essentially, the working group is just a set of permissions today. They don't have independent meetings. They don't have independent design docs. So then the question would be, should we change the permissions so that other active people in the project can approve PRs in this space? I'm not opposed to that, but I'd want to know that those people have some degree of familiarity with the code base that they're reviewing and sort of the way that Istio Cuddle command maturity works. I don't think that's a terribly high bar.
Yeah, no, I suspect any of the fairly active maintainers would be more than capable of reviewing those PRs.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'm looking at the code owner. So Istio user maintainer maintains primarily Istio Cuddle, right? And on top of that, there's a test integration Istio Cuddle, which is also very related to Istio Cuddle. And I think that's about it. Oh, there's also the config analysis in the package folder, which is also maintained by network maintainer. So that's no issue. And then there's the ambient Argo, which I think Mitch, you might create that. So that's maintained by Istio user maintainer, and that's it. So it does have a little bit of overlap with some of the networking maintainers. And I know network maintainers are, at least a couple of maintainers are really, really active. So I think it would be a good if we just add networking maintainers to the folders that Istio user experience maintainers are maintained.
Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, solve the problem for him for the short term, and then longer term, maybe we should look into some roadmap for the user experience working group to provide more guidance to people.
Yep.
Okay, well, if people agree, I'll capture that in the meeting minutes and we'll convey that to Kirby.
All right. Sounds like we're done on this topic. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up is the API progression, unless we want to skip to THC eligibility requirements, which I suspect will be shorter. I think that's probably just an FYI. Is that true? One second.
Yeah, I just put it on there to make sure people saw it. If I can summarize the API, right? Whitney and that group have been working on getting us to be better about the hygiene of progressing APIs to stable. And so there's a recommendation to progress all of the networking APIs, possibly with the exception of proxy config and peer authentication, though likely including peer authentication, to V1 stable, right? So no longer having V1 beta or V1 alpha designates. And I think in general, most of the TOC, I haven't seen everybody right back on the thread, are in favor of making this progression just as a signal to users that these APIs are actually stable and we do intend to support their usage of them. As we have been doing for the last many years at this point. And that if we were to deprecate them, they would go through a standard GA-based deprecation policy, which again, we are committed to. And so this is really just signaling to users that these APIs are stable to use. Even these APIs may not see a lot of usage, particularly in our recommendation, for instance, with Ambient would be to use the gateway APIs for many of these use cases. That doesn't mean that these APIs are going away and that users won't be able to use them. So I think, unless I'm general consensus about that, I think I'm trying to see who's written back about it. So I think we're just still waiting to hear back from some other TOC members to get their opinions, but Lynn, John, Mitch, and I are of that opinion. Eric, have you had a chance to look at? You are muted. You are still muted.
I see that. At least it tells me, are you talking? No, my comment was, yeah, I pretty much agree with any of the comments that are in there. I don't have anything really to add to those.
Then I'll just harass Niraj to get his feedback. And this is just, time is really awkward for him. And then we'll just resolve that in the TOC channel and make a decision about that. But if folks here have any opinions about that, feel free to let us know. Mitch, is there a TLDR from that?
It looks like whether what I'd like to do is get a side-by-side of other projects to measure relative health. But right now, just grading us based on our health for the last 3 years, there's not a lot of variation. It's pretty consistent.
Okay. Predictability is good.
So maybe we've just been unhealthy in terms of new contributors for a very long time, or perhaps there's less to worry about. But certainly, there's not an urgent or new problem that's facing us in terms of new contributors.
Okay. All right. Well, does one of the steering members want to talk about the eligibility stuff?
I think Justin probably added that. So
I
I
don't.
added it.
oh,
Yeah, I don't think I did. I could chat about it, but
Go for it.
well, I think that. So we're talking about making some larger changes to TOC in steering, but no proposal has actually been made. The only change that was made just last week was that we removed the working group requirement just because the fewer people, like it seems like there's less work being done for working groups. There is some question about whether working groups are still valuable. And so that actually then probably does turn into a TOC conversation generally about working groups. But really the only change that got made last week for TOC requirements is we just took what was essentially the requirement before around being a maintainer and the amount of time that you've been in the project, and just made that the requirement instead of making the requirement that you had to be a lead.
So all the properties of a lead without the name, basically.
Right, just because there was some question whether we were going to continue to have working group leads, and so then making that a strict requirement was, questionable.
So this should open up new pipeline for us, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
Do we have any logistics for KubeCon next week that we want to talk about? Mitch, you have a bicycle tour?
I think our booth staffing is still light. In my experience, the booth staffing will stay light because people don't like making commitments, but then the booth ends up being rather full at all times. So I'm not terribly worried about that, but certainly if there are times when the booth is empty and doesn't have anyone at it, that's not a great look for us. And the CNCF, of course, does watch that in terms of what sort of booth they will give us next year. I've got a thing out on the TOC channel. I need to finalize plans for a bike tour today. So if you could let me know if you are interested in joining for that or not. Lynn has proposed moving it later, which I think will work as long as it works for other people. So just wanted to check around on that if you're going to be with us and interested in a bike tour of Paris on Monday.
Awesome.
And I don't remember which company will be donating T-shirts. I honestly haven't heard anybody. I think Solar might have some T-shirts, but I don't know if Microsoft or I think the last time was Tetra and one other company also donated T-shirts. So that's a little bit unknown.
I'm out. I don't have any.
Okay.
Melissa, do we know if the CNCF will have a good supply of Istio t-shirts this time?
Good question. I don't know. I think
That was an issue, right? The last time, right? They had a small number, but it vanished quickly.
yeah. I think they had one, the one before, maybe in Amsterdam. Some people were able. I don't
Yeah.
remember because I remember I got some great. It's your T-shirt from the store.
Long term, maybe with steering, we might want to try to contribute our blue Istio T design to the CNCF and see about if they'll sell those. For my part, the gray ones just kind of.
Or ask them to use some of their graphic design budget to whip up something cool for us.
Yeah.
They usually have some pretty cool designs, actually. So.
Yeah, I'm not seeing much T-shirt on their online website, so it's hard to tell.
The website has been out. They've been in the habit of more or less marking everything is out of inventory on the website for the months leading up to KubeCon as they build up inventory for the in-person store.
Let's see.
And they usually have new product at the in-person too.
I planned on getting a whole bunch of different project tees for my company's booth to help show off the technologies we integrate with, and they've been out of stock for like 3 months. There's nothing.
Mm.
I think they're retooling the store too. There's supposed to be a relaunch later this year I don't know exactly what problems they're hoping to solve or what will be better about it, but it'll be different.
Okay, read the booth. I haven't had time to look at the schedule yet, Mitch, but I definitely will. And Lynn and I will certainly make sure that solo people who are present can pick slots. So we'll ping that internally.
There's the link in the chat.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Are there any other things like I see this Kubernetes contributor, right, which is going on. There's probably a gateway API track at that. I haven't looked at the schedule for that at all.
Oh, that's on Monday though, right?
That's Monday. But that's certainly quite relevant to us. So we'll take a look at that one. Maybe we can discuss this stuff in the channel, but if we can figure out a time for that, maybe we should try and make sure the bike rides doesn't collide with it. Part.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I'm not sure about if there's any other part, but
Are those invite only this year, or are they open for anyone to join?
they are invite. You can usually get yourself invited.
Okay.
Usually you just have to talk to one of the track maintainers and have them say that you were a relevant contributor.
I'll reach out to Rob.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for the link, John.
Everyone's good. busy week ahead before Paris, so we should wrap up.
Sounds good.
All right. Did we talk about the API progression?
We-
Okay, cool.
Very briefly.
Did we all agree on something?
You even voted, John.
It was more an FYI because the TOC, like, well, I promised to ping Neeraj, and we said we would discuss it in the channel, but it was more like an
Oh, okay.
FYI to
Yeah.
everybody else who's here.
Sorry, I've got construction going on, so I need to go be a physical project manager.
I was
Okay.
gonna say the other thing is we should get releases out today, 121.0, and then the 2 patch releases, I believe.
Awesome.
As long as the docs and stuff get all done, I think we should be good.
Also, I think to protest Eric's travel budget reduction, we should get a cardboard cutout of him for the booth.
Put my picture on the memory, or the USB stick, and
There we go.
All right, I will stop the recording.
Oh, I put that on recording. Okay. Sorry, I
Oh,
should
no,
make
that should be on the recording, Mitch.
that.